Good morning. My name is Kate Fronta, and on behalf of First Unitarian Church of Wilmington, Delaware, I welcome you to our worship service today. Our website, firstuuwilm.org, is always available to check out the latest happenings, to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter, and to learn about this welcoming congregation. We welcome you if you grew up in a faith tradition or if you did not. Whether you fall on the scale towards the theist side or towards the atheist side, or if you don't even know if you're on that scale at all, you are welcome here. This is a community of seekers. No matter where you are on your journey, no matter the color of your skin, and no matter whom you love, you are welcome here. A gentle reminder for those in the sanctuary today, please keep your masks on over your mouth and nose at all times. Please stay with members of your own household, and you are allowed to sing softly now, please, as our way of being together, and you can always just sway with the music. For those at home, please feel free to burst out in song. As we close our service, please exit promptly and save your socializing for the outside after worship. We thank you for your ongoing cooperation. And now, let us prepare our hearts and minds for worship.
Good morning. I am the Reverend Larry Piers, minister here at First Unitarian Church of Wilmington. I'm so glad that you are here today on this somewhat cold and chilly morning. May you find something that warms your heart, that strengthens your spirit, and strengthens your connection to what really matters. I'm inviting you to join with me in the call to worship this morning. The words should appear on the screen, and we'll say them together. We affirm that love is our greatest purpose. Accepting one another is the truest form of faithful living. The search for truth is our constant star. We pledge our hearts, minds, and hands to challenge injustice with courage, to find hope in times of fear, and to live out our Unitarian Universalist values every day as a beloved community. Thus do we covenant with each other and with all that is sacred in life.
We light our chalice today with the words of Reverend A. Powell Davies. For those watching online, if you have a chalice at home, please light it with us. So far as I can see, all the great leaders and the great exemplars of religion possessed faith in life's essence, in its hidden meaning, in its moral claim, and in the rightness of its inner spiritual guidance. And by this the great ones lived their lives. So must we. There are no problems greater than our power to solve them. There are no burdens greater than our strength. We shape, by every moment of our lives, the great decisions. Then let us venture still, with reason as a lamp to guide us, but lighted with the light of faith.
You've got to do when the Spirit says do. You've got to do when the Spirit says do. When the Spirit says do, you've got to do, oh Lord. You've got to do when the Spirit says do. 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 You've got to sing when the Spirit says sing. You've got to sing when the Spirit says sing. When the Spirit says sing, you've got to sing, oh Lord. You've got to sing when the Spirit says sing. 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 You got to dance when the Spirit says dance. You got to dance when the Spirit says dance. When the Spirit says dance, you got to dance, oh Lord. You've got to dance when the Spirit says dance. 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 You've got to laugh when the Spirit says laugh. You've got to laugh when the Spirit says laugh. When the Spirit says laugh, you've got to laugh, oh Lord.
Yes. Now, please join me in affirming our mission. First Unitarian Church of Wilmington is a beloved community that nourishes minds and spirits, fights injustice, and transforms the world through loving action.
Unitarian Universalists have 6 sources from which we draw our beliefs. Each source can be seen as a way of exploring the story of who we are, how we came to be, and where we are going. Today, I am sharing our origin story. As I tell it, think about which sources the author used to put together the tale. Have you ever watched a seed grow? Have you ever noticed how it begins so small, so still, so quiet, like a gift wanting to be opened, and how slowly it wakes up, begins to unfold, growing into something larger and larger and larger? Then you know that whatever comes from a seed usually ends up looking very little like the seed it came from, which is also true of the very first seed. Once, long, long ago, way back before the beginning, so long ago, there was no such thing as time, because there was no one there to count it. Everywhere was a huge, deep, mysterious place, like something waiting to happen. There were no stars, no sun or moon. There was no place like Earth, not a drop of water or a single tree or rock or flower, and no living beings anywhere. But in that deep waiting space was hidden the tiniest point of something no bigger than a seed. It was not a flower seed. It was not an elm tree seed. It was not a seed of corn, although all those things were included in the seed. You might call it an everything seed, because that is what it became. No one knows where that first seed came from, or how it was planted, or how it knew, in the way that only seeds seem to know, how long to wait for just the right moment to sprout and grow. But all at once, this tiny seed, cradled and nourished in the rich soil of space, woke up, broke open, and began to unfold. Unfolding, unfolding, and blossoming forth into an enormous, blazing ball of bright light, like a great-grandmother's sun. And the universe was born. Out fluttered the galaxy like a storm of snowflakes, swirling and gathering into the brightest, most blindingly beautiful clouds of stars. And out of these star clouds whirled our own star, the one we call the sun. And our Earth and our moon and all the round spinning planets we have learned how to name. And this is the secret of that tiny seed. You and I were there in the very beginning, just as the idea of each leaf on a big oak tree lies hidden inside an acorn. We were there with all the stars and planets, all the rocks and oceans, plants and animals and people. Everything that is now, ever was, or ever will be, was inside that first tiny seed. So whenever you hold a seed in your hand and wonder what it could become, imagine how you and all that is here once came from the tiniest speck of an everything seed before it sprouted and grew long, long ago in the way back beginning of time. Now, if this were an ordinary story, it would end right here. But this story of the universe keeps unfolding. What once began in a blazing blossom of light continues to this day. And every day after, new stars sprout open in the deep soil of space. New plants and animals appear on the earth. Seeds of many kinds are scattered everywhere to help us remember. And new people are born every day with a spark of that first light still alive and burning deep inside, waiting, like the everything seed, to shine in ways that are yet to be known. What sources did you hear in that story? Can you tell that the author finds thoughts about how the universe started awe-inspiring? Could the author know enough about the Big Bang to make the seed analogy without science? Did my words sound more like a scientific hypothesis or a poem? Sometimes we speak about the way we learn about the world through science and the spiritual renewal that comes through the direct experience of mystery and wonder, as if they are completely unrelated. I wonder if they might just be different ways of looking at the same thing.
Let us join now together in a time of prayerful meditation. Let us pause even for just a few moments to reflect upon our own life and lived experiences. Yes, there have been times and circumstances when you have felt a sense of life's wonder and mystery. Yes, there have been times when you have been surprised by joy. Yes, there have been times when you have felt gratitude in your heart. Any of these experiences may have been very obvious or very subtle. Any of these experiences may have lasted a while or touched you only for a few seconds. Notice and be aware of when these experiences have happened for you. savor them again now. Sense their lasting impressions upon your heart. Sense their lingering or fleeting impact upon who you are. Stay with your reflections, your savoring of these moments, while we pause and move now into this time of shared silence. May we know the blessing of these moments now and again and again. Amen. Each week, we gather to take time to hold in our prayerful hearts all those who we have a sense that they need some special care, some of our attention, some of our love, and some of our compassion. Let's pause now and think of those names, and then, as you feel ready, say their names in this room or write their names on the chat. Who are you holding in your heart on this day? We cannot help to include in our prayers today our concern for the people of Ukraine. So let's begin that time of thinking about them and holding them in our hearts as we watch this musical meditation, Prayer for Ukraine. At this time, those who are in the sanctuary are invited to come forward to light a candle during the musical piece and to express your care and concern for those who are grieving. Let us keep in mind those who are wounded, those who have had to find refuge elsewhere, those who find they must defend themselves, and those who are struggling. So please step forward if you wish, while this music is playing, to light your candle for the people of Ukraine and all who are impacted by this tragedy. Let's pass it on.
May all we hold in our prayerful hearts find peace and healing on this day. And now I'm going to introduce our responsive reading today. And in doing so, I'd like to introduce you to Olympia Brown, the woman who wrote the words we will be speaking together shortly. Ms. Brown was raised Universalist. Before Unitarian Universalism was joined, there were Universalists. This is the mid-1800s, and she convinced her father to send her and her sister to college, which was rare enough in the 1850s, 1860s. Ministry called her, and then she had to fight to get into seminary, which she did. She persisted, she was accepted, but then when she graduated, she faced opposition to ordination. So she had to preach, and she preached, and in doing so, convinced her colleagues that she was worthy of ordination. She persisted. She kept her own name when she wed in 1873, and she spent time in parish ministry until she was called to activism for women's rights, particularly the right to vote, which she did get to see come to pass finally in 1919. Brown was known for taking up lost causes, be it a failed church or the right for women to vote, and turning it around. In her churches, women started voting and holding office for the first time, and she invited women guests to the pulpit, including Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, to express their views in her church. Olympia Brown is known as the first woman ordained in the Universalist faith, and her words still ring true today. So please join me, read aloud where it says all. Stand by this faith, work for it, and sacrifice for it.
There is nothing in all the world so important as to be loyal to this faith, which has placed before us the loftiest ideals, which has comforted us in sorrow, strengthened us for noble duty, and made the world beautiful.
Do not demand immediate results, but rejoice that we are worthy to be entrusted with this great message, that you are strong enough to work for a great, true principle without counting the cost.
Go on finding ever new applications of these truths and new enjoyments in their contemplation, always trusting in the one God which ever lives and loves.
Please be seated.
When I was 10 years old, my stepfather tried his best to bond with me. And of course, he drew upon his own understanding of what a father and son could do to bond. For him, it meant such things as throwing a football in the backyard. Not my John, as they say in Philadelphia, but I did it as enthusiastically as I could. I think I became pretty obvious fairly soon that this just wasn't my thing. He also took me on day-long fishing trips. Now, because this meant a drive, usually to some beautiful spot, my enthusiasm was sustained for a little longer. After I set up the fishing pole with the right amount of bait and tackle, I would throw out the line into the water and watch it plunge, and watch the bobber bobble, and watch intently to observe any sign of a bite on the line, and watch the bobber bobble, and watch the bobber bobble. So looking back on it, I guess these were my first experiences of mindfulness meditation. Now, in one of those fishing trips, after so much standing with the pole and watching, I decided to tell my stepfather, I'm going for a stroll. I secured the fishing pole handle among some rocks, and I began to stroll. And I strolled and I strolled until I noticed a group of people gathered together on this pier that went out into the water. They were fishing too, yet they all looked like they were having so much fun. They were laughing and they were talking and they were eating, and I was drawn to them, their exuberance and their engagement. Now, I didn't want to intrude. I was somewhat timid, but nevertheless, I walked towards them onto the pier just to kind of be in their aura for a while. And I walked around listening and looking and taking it all in. And I decided to take a closer look at the long rope where it seemed they had strung their catch, some of the fish they had caught that day. And just at that moment, I lost my footing at the edge of the pier. I was just about to fall in when I reached out to catch the arm of one of the women that was standing there. The strength of her arm and the stoutness of her body lured me towards her. I'm sure she could sense my embarrassment and my attempt to begin an apology, and then she immediately said, "Child, when you're falling, it doesn't matter who you hang on to." Let's let those words simmer in us for a moment. I looked into her African American face and we stared at each other for a few minutes until we both smiled and laughed, and I found my footing again and steadied myself, and we talked for a little while, still laughing at our encounter, the way that we had met. What a way to meet someone. As I walked back to my fishing spot, her words resounded within me with a wisdom that I knew was more than just for that moment alone. Though that woman and I were probably worlds apart in some ways, I felt so enveloped by her willingness to let me hold onto her arm and her directness in the timeless universal wisdom that she offered. When you're falling, it doesn't matter who you hang on to. I pass on her wisdom to you this morning. You see, I understand, and you do too, that falling can happen in so many ways in our lives and in so many different times in our lives. Falling is not just when we're losing our footing. We can fall sometimes and not even know it. In those moments, we might find ourselves holding on to something, and we may have an undeniable sense of the difference between losing the metaphorical ground beneath us and finding that steadiness that seems to be there to hold us. Life has perhaps too many experiences of falling. Some we never anticipated, and others we know are part of the rough and tumble of life itself. We may lose a loved one, and the ground beneath us just does not feel the same. We grapple with fears or uncertainties, and we'd rather fall into retreat rather than face the terrifying world. We find the momentum that we once had sometimes fading away, and we fall into some new way of getting through and getting by. We undergo some transition in work or in a relationship or in health, and we fall into some new understanding of who we are, why we are, and what we do next. Now, we don't always admit it when it's happening. Sometimes we avoid. Sometimes avoiding is actually the precursor to actually accepting I remember the woman whose arm I grabbed when I was slipping on that day. She wiped the words of my apology away before I could even say them. She held me with a firmness that eased my embarrassment into a new steadiness and a new acceptance of the situation I was in. As a Unitarian Universalist community, I believe we are challenged to embody that same kind of embrace of one another, that same kind of understanding that at times we need to hold on to one another or to something. If Unitarian Universalism were a character, that character has, let's admit it, tendencies to emphasize ongoing progress, individual responsibility, and relentless improvement. Our Unitarian Universalist ancestors, they even carved their characteristic optimism on stone or ornate plaques in their churches with some distillation of these words from 1885 by Reverend James Freeman Clarke. Perhaps you've heard them. I don't think anyone was there when they were first penned. The fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, the leadership of Jesus, salvation by character, and the continuity of human development in all worlds, or the progress of mankind onward and upward forever. These particular words might seem a little out of date to some of us now, but this was a common Unitarian affirmation well into the 1920s. Yet the optimism, the emphasis on progress, and that, could someone give me a baton, please, so I could strike up the orchestra? That phrase, onward and upward forever, are still very much a part of the character of our faith, aren't they? Yeah. I'm sure I was drawn to Unitarian Universalism because its tendency towards optimism and that keep on, keeping on attitude that matches some of my own character in a lot of ways. Now, who remembers, this is the pop quiz in the sermon, who remembers my favorite book as a child? Anybody? Robert? The Little Engine That Could. Is that what you're saying through your mask? That's right. Ding, 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 ding. You're right. That engine's chorus, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can, has propelled me forward, especially through some circumstances that would have otherwise stopped me in my tracks. I suspect I have a lot of companions in this room and online on that little engine that could, right? We're sometimes always on that track, and sure, our independence, sure, our self-reliance, sure, our commitment to progress and ongoing growth and development, it's an integral part of our character as Unitarian Universalists. It has an upside, and it also has a downside as well. The downside of our relentless self-reliance and our emphasis on continuous progress might mean that we might not reach out for help. It means that we feel we must do it all ourselves. It means that we might tend to canonize the most independent and individualistic aspects of who we are, rather than also affirm our equal need for community, connection, and the support of a community. We know it's really not an either-or choice. We dealt with this polarity recently when we were recruiting new pastoral care associates for our congregation. These are people who are available and do provide support to members of our congregation during times of need, transition, and grief, sorrow, or illness. What I learned is that apparently we don't always reach out when we could in our congregation. Sometimes we have to scout out who actually needs help because they might not let us know. Upon reflecting upon this, we recognize that our tendency towards independence might mean that we can be a little lopsided, reluctant to ask for help, embarrassed when we do, or seem like it's a personal fault. But friends, we need to get off of that little engine that could sometimes at the next stop once in a while, don't we? Okay, great. So as our lives unfold, we come to realize that who we are and what we have become is an intersection of many selves, and that we need to hold on to one another when we're falling in the many ways that I mentioned, without embarrassment, without apology, without hesitation. And at times, as time goes on, we recognize that we may have some fixed ideas of what we can hold on to when we are falling. With these fixed ideas, we might not always allow ourselves to fully experience the vastness around us or the vastness within us. Sometimes this vastness holds us as well. Yes, though we may have a fixed idea of what's available to us, life oftentimes has other ideas and presents to us now and again those perspectives. In addition to the kind of practical support that we can get from one another, there are also ways in which we can be strengthened and supported by what at first glance might seem invisible, intangible ways, but are just as real, just the same. Awakened in the middle of the night, when I have nothing to do, nothing to accomplish, but just be with the dark, a stillness might find me. It can be a centering and awakening stillness. That stillness, though I cannot see it, has a way of making its impact on me in ways that I cannot fully describe, but its nurture can be as real itself. That silence, that holy stillness can hold us as well, and sometimes it does. Or through most of my days, I can get by with a take-it-all-for-granted attitude. And then, like a bird song that pierces through the sky, I awaken to the absolute wonder to what is. Out of nowhere, I might have this instant recognition that it's a wonder that anything exists at all. This fleeting, glimmering moment cannot be seen, but it has a way of making its impact on me in ways that I cannot fully describe, and it becomes as real itself. That deep sense of gratitude for the wonder of what is can hold us as well sometimes. Or we might be holding the hand of a loved one, knowing that they are entering the twilight of their life. They are fading, and our grief at this imminent loss is so hard that we may want to avoid it. Until in our grieving, we find we have a deep appreciation for the presence of this particular life, and even the presence of life itself. Through our tears, something may dissolve in us, and we have that sense that life is a gift, not a given. That moment can linger in us. We can't describe it fully. It's as real itself. It makes its mark upon us, and its impact does not fade away too easily. We can be held by a sense of presence, a holy presence of another, or even presence itself, which we sometimes know more clearly in its impending absence. There are some days we might not leave the meditation cushion in our accustomed way. We might linger there, savor the moment as if it was the very first moment we ever experienced. We can't describe it. It makes its mark on us. And its impact does not fade away too easily. We are held by a sense of this moment arising in us, a new moment never before existed. And that moment holds us. Or this very week, we saw a woman nominated for a high office being berated by foolish questions and sideswiping, grandstanding comments masquerading as real questions from, yes, elected officials. Yet she had a steadiness, a strength that allowed her to see through the attempted fog bombs with a well-honed inner sensibility that put it all into a broader perspective, certainly for her, maybe for us. We can't describe that steadiness. It's as real itself. It makes its mark on us, and its impact on us does not fade away too easily. But this nomination for the Supreme Court justice, she was held by a steadiness and a strength. And so are we, sometimes held by a steadiness and a strength we cannot always explain away too easily. Or we may find some respite at a holy shrine, candles steadily flickering in the room, echoes of singing still resonating within this space, and a calmness that embraces and holds us even in our feelings of sadness or despair or hope. And we hum to ourselves some version of these words of a hymn that could make sense to us. There's a sweet, sweet spirit in this place. And I know it is the Spirit of the Lord. There are sweet expressions on each face. And I know we feel the presence of the Lord. These might not be the words that we would have chosen, but sometimes we are held by a sweet, sweet spirit in the presence of others and the presence of what is holy. Each of us has been shaped, therefore, and formed, I want to say, by invisible but impactful moments like these, similar or much different than these. I have no doubt about that. What seems so ethereal can sometimes become so tangible to us in those moments. What feels so ordinary can sometimes become extraordinary. What seems so real can also seem so spiritual. There's a truth in those moments that breaks through whatever hard-nosed conceptions we have enshrined in our own head about what holds us. Experiences are what shape and form us more than our thoughts about experiences. experiences draw upon different aspects of our brain, mind, capacities than just concepts alone. So when it comes to the study of spiritual experiences, I've been particularly fascinated by the work of Andrew Newberg, a neuroscientist, and his research colleagues at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital in Philadelphia. For several years, he's been using brain scan technology to look at what happens in the brain during spiritual experiences or spiritual practices. If you happen to have seen a National Geographic series, The Story of God, that featured Morgan Freeman as the host, he demonstrated one of Andrew Newberg's work. First, he had the experience of getting a brain scan in a restful state, and then he got injected with a radioactive dye. I wouldn't recommend it. And he then was instructed to meditate on his understanding of God. After about 15 minutes or so, he gets another brain scan to see how his brain may have changed following that meditation. There's a noticeable indication of more activity in his frontal lobes as a result of that meditation, which we could see in the scan. Freeman's results are like hundreds of the results of similar sessions that Newberg has done with nuns and Buddhist monks and meditators, people of various religious perspectives, Christians and Jews and Unitarian Universalists, atheists and agnostics. And his research has concluded that spiritual practice and or meditating on one's God or one's religious experience, in his words, temporarily interrupts the brain's normal responses to the world. In Newberg's extensive research for over 20 years, he's concluded that there are some common qualities of what he calls enlightenment experiences. There's the enlightenment experiences kind of with a big E and those with a little e, but that's more detail than I can go into this morning. But the qualities include a sense of intensity, a strong sense of unity with God or with humanity, a clarity, and a surrender. Each of these qualities make some temporary changes that are detectable in the brain scan. It also seems, he says, that they create a permanent large-scale change in our awareness, our behavior, or our belief system. These experiences of transformational awareness, he says, can last for seconds, minutes, hours, or even days. But at some point, the brain will return to its habitual way of functioning and decision-making. However, and this is the point I want to underline, it's not the same brain. Their studies document that subtle and permanent changes will have taken place in key brain areas as a result of these spiritual practices. Yes, the intangible and the invisible can actually make tangible differences in us, in our brain, in our approach to life, in our capacity to care for the world and one another. I am concluding here, but not before I make one further point. Is that okay with you? Okay. When Adam Frank, an astrophysicist, was asked about William Blake's notable poem, which has that line, "To hold eternity in the palm of our hands," he replied, "Unfortunately, most of us don't know how to hold eternity in the palm of our hands. In fact, most of us feel lucky if we can just hold it together until the end of the day. Sometimes, however, for the briefest moment, he continues, we do pick up a scent that there's something more going on than this daily round of survival. But those moments pass, and waves of mundane urgency swallow us up again. He says, tumbling through chaos of our day-to-days, we wonder if Blake's vision of a broader, more expansive experience is nothing more than a poet's fancy. So we ask the question, can we really see the universe in a grain of sand, even as we slog through traffic? Can we really hold affinity in our hands, even as we drop off kids to violin practice? Frank responds in this way. He says, the answer, I believe, is yes. In fact, I'm sure of the answer is yes. The connection between the everyday reality we experience and the boundless landscapes of cosmic beauty, inspiration, and joy is actually so close, so present for us. It's there in the dust of your car, the mess on your desk, even the mess on your desk, I say. I like that one. And the swirling water in your sink. How do I know this, he says? Because I'm a scientist, damn it. And I know that science, under all its theories, equations, experiments, and data, is really trying to teach us to see the sacred in the mundane and the profound in the prosaic. The end of last month, there were 40 of us that gathered in retreat, a spiritual retreat together where we drew upon the spiritual practices of the transcendentalists. It was a great opportunity to do some practices together. And one of those practices we engaged in was a meditation based on these words by Rebecca Parker. So I want to invite you now, as I conclude my remarks, to engage in this practice with me and let's put a bookmark here. Maybe return to it sometime this week. Maybe find 5 minutes each day. I'm putting it in each of your calendars as I do this. 5 minutes each day to practice this over this week. So as we breathe in, say to yourself silently, there is a love holding me. And as you breathe out, say to yourself, there is a love holding all that I love. As we breathe in, let us say to ourselves, there is a love holding all. As we breathe in, I guess it's out. As we breathe out, we say, I rest in this love. And let's do it once more this time, substituting the word I with we. As we breathe in, say to ourselves softly, there is a love holding us. As we breathe out, say there's a love holding all that we love. And as we breathe in, let us say to ourselves, there's a love holding all. And as we breathe out together, let us say, I rest in this love. So may it be.
unwilling to hear, denying the beauty we found. We are answering the call of love. Hands joined together as hearts beat as one, emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim we are answering the call of love. A bright new day is dawning, when love will not divide. Reflections of grace in every embrace, fulfilling the vision divine. We are answering the call of love. Hands joined together as hearts beat as one, emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim we are answering the call of love. We are answering the call of love.
This month, we've heard from some of the worship associates about what faith means or is to them, and today is my turn. And I'd like to approach this a little differently, kind of like the vastness within and the vastness without that Reverend Larry just mentioned. For me, there are two levels or two access points for faith. The first is the jacket of faith that I put on, which helps with the surface feelings. And this is where life can get stormy, can be affected by news or inflation or shifting relationships. So this jacket can get frayed and need mending. But if I make space and time for stillness, for nurturing, for breathing in and out that love, I can sink into the place below the surface where faith is, for me, a state of being. And that's what I call my faith with a capital F place. For there are some things I just don't lose faith in or about. It's just been ingrained in me from the practice I've nurtured in myself, or perhaps just a little of my nature from birth. I feel I've always been connected to that state, and I hold that as a gift. But I recognize that not everyone has such an easy access way to that state of being. Perhaps you do, or perhaps you are one of those folks who has gifts in other areas. And connection where I lack connection. But my faith state of being is not something that is shaken. Whereas my faith jacket right now is getting pressed, not in a good way with ironing, but getting pressed right now with the state of the world and our country. Recognizing that, I know when I need to tend my faith jacket. To mend it a little, and this is where First Unitarian comes in. This community, these services, the small groups, each of you helping me mend my faith jacket when it is looking a bit worse for the wear, and this is why it's important for me to give and to pledge to First U. We are still in our pledge drive. Pledge, please, if you haven't. I pledge, and when I am in person, I give an extra little bit just to do my part to give back to this place that provides me with so much. So there are 4 ways to give. In person, you can leave a check or cash in the back of the church in the sanctuary on Sundays as you're leaving. Or you can mail a check to our street address on Halstead Road. Online, you can use the Venco mobile app. Or you can visit our website's donation page at firstuuwilm.org/donate-now. Thank you for taking the time to give to First Unitarian Church and to pledge. And now, please join me in dedicating our offering. To the work of this congregation, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action, we dedicate our lives, and these are offerings.
Dona nobis pacem, pacem, dona nobis pacem, dona nobis pacem, dona nobis pacem.
Perhaps you can continue to sing or hum those words to yourself or with others this week, and maybe that could be your spiritual practice. It's such a wonder to see the choir actually singing in person, and such a gift to receive that music. I want to mention that I am leaving soon after the service to get to the installation of a new minister at the Unitarian Universalists of Southern Delaware, so I won't have much time to hang out with you today. If you're a newcomer, next Sunday, April 3rd, you may have already received an invitation to join me following the service as an opportunity to get acquainted, talk a little bit more about Unitarian Universalism. So if you're online or in this room, please feel free to join us then. So the closing words I have are from a cherished former minister of this congregation. These are words that we have enshrined and written on one of our walls. These words by Reverend Robert Doss. For all who seek God, may God go with you. For all who embrace life, may life return your affection. For all who seek a right path, May a way be found and the courage to take it step by step.